Hi everyone, my name is Joy and this is
Summer.
And we're here to share some tips on dance performance for Encore and at your core. All right, let's get to it. Point number one is thinking about the message and the expression. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I really love about dance is that you get to kind of see the music and see the story within the music, right? But then you also get to look at your own story within that, and how does that connect with what's going on in the song, right? And this is when we look at dance and we consider what dance is and what it's been made for. I really see dance as this true, pure form of worship, right? You're trying to find the ways that somebody else has interpreted these emotions and these feelings that are going into the song, and you get the opportunity to kind of contribute to that. And so for me, I really want to see, as a judge at Encore, I want to see ways that you are telling this story and putting in your own story as well. And so seeing those emotions and seeing the ways that you're interpreting the lyrics and maybe going a step beyond, right? And really immersing yourself into what that story means for you. And so it's just so beautiful to get to kind of see that, and I really want to see that connection with the story.
So storytelling is a big part of it.
Oh, for sure.
And in order to get that storytelling part, we have to listen to the song many, many times to understand like where you're peaking and what the story is actually about, right?
Yeah, and even going through and like doing research about like what does joy mean in the Bible? Like what are the different stories within the Bible? And maybe if you don't personally connect with that idea, well, where is there a story maybe in the Bible or somewhere else that you can pull from, right? And maybe you can connect with a certain person in the Bible who's experienced this thing, right? So really just making sure you're doing that research and that you know the song, right? You know where not just the lyrics are telling the story, but the music's also telling a story. So what connection are you making with the music? What ways can you maybe slow down and maybe even though the words are saying one thing, maybe the music is really soft and slow. What does that combination, how does that continue that story, right? Maybe it's talking about joy in the midst of sadness. And how do you then express that beyond just what the lyrics are saying? I feel like that's really when you get to a point of just it becomes so much stronger in what you're saying.
Oh, and expression.
Yeah, within performance, I think that the way that I try to, when I'm performing, I consider what is the emotion that's behind this movement. And I really want to not just act that emotion, but to feel that emotion. But what you're doing is because you're performing, you kind of want to take what that emotion is and what that expression would be and just put it a little bit above. You just exaggerate it a little bit. But really, all of those emotions should be genuine emotions of what is a natural emotion to feel when you're grieving, right? Maybe it is going to be kind of this sadness and you're going to represent that in your body, but maybe it's not going to be like, wah, but it's also not going to be like, you're going to kind of feel it and bring it out a little bit more just so that it's a little more expressed so that people who are far away from you are able to kind of see that emotion a little bit stronger. But it's not always just smiling. It's not always just like, like when that smile is just plastered on, it can look really forced. So really, I think finding that way to naturally bring out emotions that you're feeling at the moment, right?
Okay, great. So tip number 2, we're going to talk about technique.
Yes.
So something about this is at Encore, there are different styles of dance, right? So we can't just say, okay, everybody has to have like perfect, ballet form or anything like that. It depends on your style of dance, your genre of dance, and doing that well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I would say one of the biggest things when it comes to technique is evaluating and knowing that the movement that you're making is a choice, right? So if I am dancing and my foot is just flopping around, well, that's not a choice that's being made, right? And in certain styles of dance, it is a choice. You have to move your feet in a flat form. You need to move your foot with a point, right? But even sometimes, like if you see somebody's pointing their toes, they've made half of a choice by just pointing the top of their toe instead of making a full choice of pointing and extending their entire toe. So it's like, it's kind of that's what I like to see, right? Is that if you're having that flexed foot, that has been a choice that you made, that it's not just flapping around like, ah, I don't know what's going on, right?
Right.
So much of it is that body control of saying, when I'm moving my arm this way, it is a choice that I'm making. This is an intentional choice. And so that's kind of what I want to see in terms of like that cleanness of the dance, is that all of these different movements have been a choice that I've made. If I'm moving my body in this way, it is obvious that that has been a choice that I've made. Because if not, then it ends up looking a little sloppy. And it can kind of be like, okay, that was not a choice, but it looks okay, but it could look so much better if it was intentional in that way.
Yeah.
We also had talked before about the importance of choreographing to your level, right? And oftentimes we think that we have to have these crazy tricks in our dance, or
turns.
yeah, or like this like super, like we have to spin 5 times and like a pirouette, and it's like sometimes that's not what your level's at. That's not what my level's at. And so you want to make sure that when you're choreographing that you're making, once again, choices that are reflective of what's going to be strong for you, right? I would rather see 1 controlled turn than 3 that are like all over the place and messy. So really find ways to be within control by putting yourself into a level that is where you're at, right? Where you're capable at.
And also, we've seen dances that are like, that has a lot of technique, but if there is no expression or like telling that story of the song, then it's just good technique.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So we want to have both the technique and the expression and the interpretation and the feel of the song as well.
Yeah, and honestly, I've seen a lot of dances where the technique is super solid, but they're jumping from one thing to a next, and that flow isn't there. So it's like, I'm gonna do an aerial, and then I'm gonna stand for a second, and then I'm gonna move into my next turn. And it's like, while the technique looks super great, and it's like, wow, that's so impressive that you did that, there isn't that flow, which is continuing that story, right? And so making sure that those movements are natural and they're flowing into each other, because then it becomes a unified piece instead of these like bits and pieces of stuff that you're like, oh yeah, that's cool, let me throw that in there, right? And you want to make sure that those movements, so if you do something like an aerial, and if you can do an aerial, that's awesome, but like, what does that mean? What is the point?
And is it necessary in that song?
Yeah, is it necessary? Right. Like if you're in the middle of like this super soft like lyrical piece and you like whip out the super fast aerial, it may be super cool, but if it's not connecting to the piece, then what's the value of it, right? And then it kind of becomes this showy thing instead of about the worship of the dance.
Yeah. Another thing is your focus, where you're looking, right? And we want that to be intentional and have a purpose. So, if you're looking at the tip of your fingertips, that's fine. That's great. Especially for groups, the focus is important. So, like, if one person's looking here and someone else is looking up there, that's like totally 2 different focuses.
Yeah.
So make sure you have an agreement on where you're looking, and that is an intentional focus.
Yeah, exactly. Once again, that idea of those choices, right? That you have been in control of the choices that you're making. Yeah, and I would even say when it comes to even some movements within techniques, like sometimes it's okay to repeat sort of pieces of the dance. Once again, if that's within your level, right? If that's going to be what's best and you can do those things very cleanly. Sometimes you see people just do different movement the entire dance, and that's great, but sometimes there isn't any unity within that.
But what if you do like the repeat of 16 counts of movement the entire song?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's too much,
Yeah.
right? So it's like kind of, once again, finding ways to tell that story in a unique way, but putting things within your level, but also making sure you push yourself a little bit. Like it's a balance.
So like maybe the first chorus, if you do something like this, the second chorus, you can do it maybe a little bigger, or, have more people do it, or
exactly. And
give a little variation.
Yeah, and finding those connecting points too. So if you are doing something different throughout the dance, that's great, but are you connecting the story, right? I sometimes will do freestyle during a dance, but I find pieces to do it. I'm not freestyling the entire dance, because then sometimes it's a little bit chaotic. You don't know what the story is. There isn't any kind of full flow where all of these pieces are connecting to each other. So you want to make sure that you're choreographing, but you can also give yourself a little bit of freedom in that way, but making sure that you're connecting those things, right?
All right, so what about in terms of choreography? So this is point number 3, is in your choreography, talk to me about literal versus abstract movements.
Yeah. I think that oftentimes when you're starting out in choreography, it's really easy to say, it says the word cross, so I have to show the cross. And it's like, okay, that's super cool and that works sometimes. And based on what the song is, you know, that's great. You know, maybe it's a hip hop song and you can do one of these guys and you can like pull it out. But
you don't have to do
yeah,
that
you
every
don't
time.
have to. Yeah, and it doesn't have to keep getting repeated. Maybe it's just one single thing. Maybe you pose here and then you bring it back out and then you do something else, right?
Or you can like carry the cross.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
This way.
There's so much more variety. When we think of love, we think hard,
Yeah.
like this is,
Hard.
it's cool, it works, but maybe what is love? What does love actually mean? Maybe it's that connection with God. So maybe your love goes up to the Lord. Like maybe it is pushing the love out, heart, like I'm expressing that love to you. Maybe that love is, you know, like a touch. Maybe it's like the Lord has blessed, you know, like something like that.
Or if it's like a fast piece.
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. Like there's so many other ways that we can interpret those things. So I encourage you when you are choreographing and when you're trying to figure out, okay, what am I thinking about doing? Let's try to push beyond that literal idea. And you know, sometimes it does work and it's okay to kind of, you know, throw out like a heart shape or like touching your, you know, your heart. Let's try to find other ways as well, right? And maybe try to give yourself like 1 or 2 literal interpretations in the dance, and then beyond that, be like, okay, and what else can I do?
And you can explore that, right? Like you can explore the size of the movement, make it doing something here, doing something here, doing something, you know, bigger. You can explore the intensity and flow of energy of the movement. You can use different body parts.
Yeah, exactly.
Try using your elbow, try using your hand, try using your whole arm or your upper body, or using different spaces, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of leads to our next point of the use of space.
Yes. Yeah, no, and I think that sometimes you'll see you kind of get two or three different styles. One is that somebody stands dead center and they're like, and they just like, okay, and it's just like in the center the entire time. And that works out super great. Sometimes it's very obvious, the movement, and it becomes a little choppy. Like it's very much this, and then I move to, and I need to make sure that I go left, and now I need to make sure I go right. And then really the best means is kind of like this natural flow, right? And not chaotic in a way where you're like running back and forth from one side to the other, but finding movements. Okay, I'm gonna go left for a little bit. Now I'm really heavy on the left side. Okay, what's a movement that's gonna bring me back to center? What's a movement that's gonna be on the floor? Okay, well now I need to find a movement that's gonna bring me back up, right? I'm not gonna like do a movement to the floor and then stand up from the floor. Like.
Sometimes you are limited in space, though, especially in churches. So sometimes you only have this amount of space that you have to stand in one spot, and that's okay.
Yes.
We work with what we have, right?
Exactly.
And especially in churches or core buildings, there may be things in the front or things in the aisle if you're dancing in the aisle.
Bandstands.
Yeah, sometimes we have to stand and not do as much floor work because they can't see us.
Exactly.
So we have to take that into consideration, like where we're going to be dancing and our space there. But also trying to make use of whatever space we have available.
Exactly, yeah. And a strong dancer is going to kind of know the context and know how to manipulate a dance where I've choreographed, like maybe I've choreographed as if I had, you know, this much space. Okay, well now that's cut down in half. Okay, well then now I just need to adjust those movements slightly in a way. Maybe if I was going to do a roll on the floor, maybe I can do some kind of turn that reflects what that move would have been, right? So you want to make sure that you're flexible in a way where you're not confined by your choreography to a certain space, but then on top of that, that you are you are utilizing, once again, the space that you're given.
And it's not just the space of the room, but also like high, medium, low, right? And something you could do with a group, let's say, is do an exercise where you're, walking around, walking around, walking around, and then you say, go, or you freeze the music, and then within your group, someone has to do a high, someone has to do a medium, and someone has to do a low, and make sure all 3 levels are covered and like do a pose and freeze in that pose. So we are aware of the high, medium, low levels that we can use.
Exactly. And really do research. Like, I love following different dance pages on Instagram, and if I see a movement that I really like, then I try to add it to like saved videos. And then when I'm choreographing, I like look back at those videos and I'm like, oh, that actually kind of works with this movement, and I think I can do that. And then trying to like piece those things into it.
And something else you could also do is just playing the music and just freestyling it on your own, and see, you can even like record yourself doing it and see what you like. Maybe you'll get like, 8 bars of something you like, or you might get a whole chorus of something you like. But go ahead and just move and see what works for you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I would say, my choreography process often goes, I find the lyrics to the song. I like listen to the song a lot before I like think. I'm just kind of closing my eyes and I'm visualizing the different things that I'm seeing. Then I like print it out with like space between all of the lyrics. And then I listen to the song and I'm like, okay, I think I see this movement, especially when it comes to like group dances. I'm like, oh, I see like a ripple here, or I think I see some kind of cool lift going on here. That needs to be like a moment where we're popping out, where we're doing something there. And then I'm writing these things as I go. And then oftentimes I go into freestyle and I'll record myself dancing to the music and I'm like, that wasn't what I liked. Oh, I did like that movement. And then I go back, I watch it, I write down what that movement was, so that it helps me kind of, I'm having multiple facets of like pulling in that choreography.
So I do the notes thing as well. So I draw or write movements, and I have to record myself so that I
remember.
Yep,
no, that's what I was doing too.
Yeah. Okay, so for the next one, let's talk about groups. And how do you deal with groups in choreography?
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes when we look at group choreography, we think that it has to be movement the entire time, and it has to be everybody in unity with the same movement the entire time. And to be honest, that is really hard. Like, even if it's a 2-minute piece, trying to get, 8 girls to all look exactly, or boys, yes, 8 dancers. Trying to get 8 dancers to all look the same with the movement is really, really hard. So maybe it's adjusting the choreography a little bit and having one group go this way and having one group go this way. Maybe there's a moment of freestyle where everybody gets to freestyle. Maybe we can have a ripple of movement. Maybe we can have like a lift, or try to utilize the bodies that you have to form a picture, and to kind of choreograph beyond just movement in itself with one person, because that unity is really hard. But if you can master that unity and it looks like super solid, like I've seen several groups that are like on it and you're like, I don't know how you did that, but you all look like you have one brain, and it is so good. So really just,
or even like, 2 or 3 people can do something here, and then the rest of the larger group can do something different.
Yeah.
Like, let's say 16 counts of something, and then in a different formation, you guys can switch.
Yeah,
what you're doing, so you're not doing everything all at once at the same time.
Yeah.
Just for a different dynamic.
And you can utilize then people that maybe have varied dance levels, right? So like you're not pushing maybe somebody who's not as technically inclined with dance, you're maybe pushing them. They get to kind of do a different section, and then maybe somebody who can do something like an aerial or something like that, you can throw that in there, and you have like a little bit of variety, instead of trying to make people that maybe aren't as comfortable do something that they're not as comfortable with, right? So making sure that you're doing that. And then really my main thing when watching a group routine is that some people are like, oh, I know this dance so well, and I've got it down pat, and I'm just gonna go like, and I'm gonna be the star, right? And it really, it doesn't look as nice when you are like very obviously like, I'm gonna be the best, and like, it doesn't matter if like they're with me or not, like I'm
So
just gonna do it.
So you want to be watching
Yeah.
everybody else around
Yeah,
you.
watch the people around you and adjust, and maybe if your leg is like up here and everybody else's leg is here, like match where their leg's at, right? Because we want to see that unity, that you're performing as a group, that it's not about your personal dance technique, and like feel that emotionally for yourself. Let that be your connection and your dance, but make sure that you're aware so that it's a full story together.
Okay, great. All right, so lastly, we're going to talk about wardrobe and presentation.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to, some of the dance world, the costumes aren't as modest as we would necessarily prefer in church or like at your core or at Encore. So really trying to find ways to find a more modest means to find a costume, right? So even sometimes we have like leotards with like nude tights, and like even though in the dance world that's kind of fine, for maybe a church setting you may want to kind of have more like solid black leggings or something like that, just to kind of help, because otherwise it can become really distracting, right? And especially when it comes to dance and worship, it's not as much about what the costume is. You want the costume to reflect what the story is, and you want it to be a part of that storytelling process. But your costume shouldn't be the main thing that people are thinking about. So really be aware of, you know, what are your undergarments? Are your undergarments too bright or too dark for the costume that you're wearing?
We shouldn't be able to see your
Yes,
undergarments.
exactly. Just making sure that those are well covered, that the costume itself is going to is dark, is not see-through. You know, some of those kinds of things to just consider, and really just presenting a clean look that is unified, that is not distracting from the performance, but enhances it.
Yes. So all of this dance that we're doing, we want to encourage people to think about this as a form of worship, and it's not necessarily about showing off ourselves, right? So it's great and awesome that God has given us this gift and these skills to utilize, but we want to use these skills to glorify God and to build His kingdom, right? So I think it's hard as performers because we are on stage and we are being watched and observed. And especially for dancers, we're on display for people to see us, see our every movement. And so we just want to make sure that we're not distracting, that we can do things in a way that will point people to God and not to ourselves.
Yeah, I think what's most important in the long run, right, is that we're like it talks about the talents, right, and how, you know, the one person went through and invested in it, and one person went and dug it in the ground, and one person hid it, right? Like, or I don't remember what the other one was, but we want to make sure that when we've been given this gift, right, this talent of dance, that we're taking the time to invest in it, right? Maybe it is doing research, maybe it is going to a class, you know, making sure that we're taking time to invest in that skill, but also really making sure that we're taking the time to pray about it, to make sure that the choreography that we're doing is centered on God, to make sure that we're finding, you know, key verses, key themes that are really reflective of what we're doing. But then also, like, while you're dancing and while you're performing, like, take that moment and just say, and during this moment, it's gonna just be me and God, right? And really imagining when you're there and when you're performing that there isn't anybody else in the room, that it is just you and God, and you're performing for Him, and you're dancing with Him, right? And that's really what I want to see more than anything, is somebody who is standing there and is just fully immersed in the worship experience, and that's really where you see the beauty of dance, and that's what we really want, right? Is for other people to be able to see that, so that when it comes to a time of worship, they're like, oh yeah, like that girl, she worships while she dances, and that's what we want to see. We want to see that represented. So hopefully this helps you guys, and
to go out and dance,
yeah,
and do the best you can. All right.
Bye.